it boomed. I had to get a shed in the garden after that, man.
They had like baby kangaroos and
A live wriggly thing. Oh yeah, take your deodorant. Yeah, 13-foot Burmese python bathing in the bath.
Welcome to Pet Business Disruptors. I'm Clayton and I'm here today with Chris Jones, the Managing Director of Peregrine Live Foods, arguably the UK's largest reptile and live food distributor to the pet industry. How are we today, Chris?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Clayton. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.
Good to be here.
Came all the way up to sunny Peterborough.
I'm not sure if it's sunny today, but it'll do.
So, Chris, Peregrine's been around a hell of a long time. I remember in my days running a distributor, if anyone ever used to ask me like where I can get live food from, I think Peregrine was always the number I used to give. So they've been pretty much the mainstay of that side of it. But yeah, it's a business that's evolved enormously over the years. So yeah, just run us through it. Just run us where it started and where it is now.
It's definitely a long story, so I'll try not to do the whole thing. But Peregrine started about 35 years ago now. The two founding directors at the time, Dave Perry and Tim Green. That's how the name came about, by the way. It's not the Peregrine Falcon, just in case anybody's wondering. It's Dave Perry, Tim Green, so Peregrine, and they kind of spelled it like a falcon. So there you go. But they were actually essentially scientists working in a laboratory studying insects for the purpose of pesticides. So they were basically killing insects with pesticides, and they had to breed them in order to kill them. The story's a little bit more complicated than that. They'd probably hate me saying it in such a fashion, but they also loved reptiles. And back then there was no real reptile industry. So, between those guys and a few others around in the small industry at the time, they started a live food business. 35 years on, and an awful lot has changed. But the business now, Peregrine Live Foods, we don't just do live foods. We do a whole range of products for reptiles and other animals, fish, predominantly reptiles. The whole set of hardware, live food, frozen food, and the business nowadays, we employ about 170 people. Delivering to roughly 1,000 plus shops every week up and down the country. So yeah, it's a big change since 35 years ago in the back of a garage.
Yeah, and like you really have dominated the UK market. I think like even Ireland. I mean, so my brother had a pet shop in Ireland for 12 years, and whenever he bought live food from Glencrag, that always used to come through you. So that's
still does. Yeah.
But that's no small feat either with like customs and that sort of.
Brexit didn't help with that. Must be honest. Still a bit of a nightmare, but yeah, we get it done. We'll find a way.
But I mean, so how did you? In your time, how have you built the business? Because if I think back to if someone asked me 20 odd years ago, what is Peregrine? It's just tubs of like live food, right?
Yeah.
Now you have a whole range of products, the ProRep brand, and fish foods, Blue River, etc. I mean, how have you strategically done that over time? Difficult
for me to answer over the whole lifespan, but if I at least start from when I joined the business, which was close to 8 years ago now, I actually had my own separate business. White Python was my brand. But I was also working for my parents' business at the time in the beauty industry, so completely separate to Reptile, although there might be a few reptiles in the beauty industry at times, I can assure you.
Lizard people anyway.
Yes, some scaly people. Needed a bit of polishing. But I kind of got good at the new product development and sales and marketing in the beauty sector. When in the beauty sector, you're essentially spending probably 20% of revenue directly back onto marketing. You come into the reptile sector when you don't really have that level of competition or just general marketing prowess. I had some ideas, but nonetheless, I decided the White Python brand. It wasn't quite what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, and so I decided to sell it. So I talked to Peregrine, I talked to a couple of other guys in the industry, and I was going to sell it, and then I was going to take over my parents' business. And when I sat down with the guys, Tim and Dave at Peregrine, we basically came to a different agreement whereby I basically came to work for Peregrine as part of the deal. And that's what I did. I became sales and marketing director at Peregrine Live Foods. And within a few years, things changed. Tim and Dave decided to take a back seat, and we transitioned the business into what's called a trust, whereby all the employees now essentially have a stake in the business. And now I'm the managing director. And from there, the reason I say that is because I brought in White Python, of course, as part of the deal, but I definitely had more of a focus on the product side as I did compared to the live food. Tim and Dave were absolutely the live food specialists. They know everything. I still call them regularly now if we need some help or, we got a problem. But, for me, definitely, I'm more of a product guy and a brand, person. So, we started to build that a little bit more. We've bought out another company since then, Fish Science. So we have our own brand of fish food, which are based on insect meal now as well. We set up a new brand last year, Blue River Diets. And we got a few other exciting things in the offering at the moment. So from when I joined, roughly revenue of 14 million. Now we're up to about 22 million. And some big plans coming in the next couple of years. So exciting times ahead.
Yeah. I mean, that's impressive growth because for myself, obviously we sort of hit 4 million a year revenue with what I was doing. But there's a big jump, to be honest, to go from, let's say, I think the 10 million to 20 million stage is a massive jump within the industry. And it takes, some pretty strong strategy, some pretty strong new brands. And that's a impressive jump because it's, I think there's getting up to a million's relatively, well, I don't think getting up to a million is difficult. I think going from 1 to 4 is easier.
I think the first million is probably the hardest.
Yeah, no, getting up to 1 million is difficult. But once you hit the 1 million, so for me, us hitting the 1 million was hard.
Yeah,
because we had no scale. We struggled to really find our place in the market and say you should use us over everyone else because we're better at this. Because we weren't better at most things. We were just So it was we had to find our niche. But then once we found our niche, it was easy to build. But then there's another natural barrier in the way. Once you kind of almost saturate your particular niche, then bringing out something that then scales up and synergizes further. What sort of products did you bring in? What really spurred that growth? Because it's quite a large amount of growth in that period of time.
I mean, there's a few factors there, and some of it was done intentionally, and some of it, I'm not going to lie, is just a total accident. But I think, first of all, it wasn't just the product mix; it was the sales strategy that was important. How to actually go after other business to take market share. There was some interesting little tactics that we took at the time earlier on, 5-6 years ago, pre-COVID, I'm talking.
Yeah.
There was a smaller competitor that went out of business that ultimately helped the industry consolidate to some extent. But then COVID came along. I think everybody in the pet world, in the trade industry, knows this, that it boomed. The first few months, everyone was a bit worried, but once it started getting going, that helped. That stopped now for sure. It's definitely come right back down to earth since then. But there's a number of factors there. So I'd say products are important. Obviously, we did introduce a few new products, but I wouldn't suggest there was anything incredibly substantial in our product mix that has been the driving force behind our growth. I think it's predominantly strategy. With sales and wider business strategy as well, and the market growing. So I'd probably, if I had to do anything, I'd tip my cap to the shops out there. The Reptile independents predominantly have helped that growth by bringing new people into the market, which is only really possible through independent reptile shops who are actually selling animals.
Yeah, do you find that they're doing a lot of these independent reptile shops are now better at their game than they used to be? Because
some are. I mean, some are fantastic, and I think some of them are. Not only so good at selling, but also have the right moral compass behind them as well, in that they won't sell certain animals, despite that they would clearly make more money if they did. So in other words, especially in the reptile industry, there are clearly some unsuitable pet snakes and lizards and tortoises that grow incredibly large, for example. So They're very good at that. But like all businesses or all industries, there's going to be good ones and bad ones, and there's definitely a few bad ones out there. But I'd suggest not as many as there used to be.
I think there's definitely been a thinning out. I think what is true is that with the internet, I think people who are morally dubious get found out now very easily. I think there used to be, so I'm going to put this back to, let's say there was a company I used to, I'm going to name their name so I don't want to embarrass anyone, but they had a product and they had like a bad production run, and all their it was a dog food, and all their food was like blown and it was off. And like we were getting it delivered, not knowing, sending it out, shops were getting it, and you open the packet and it stunk, it was awful. And people would phone them up and go, this food's off. Like, and they would say, that's the first we've heard of it. Oh, really sorry to hear this, And they were getting thousands of these calls. But this was early 2000s. So it was sort of pre-internet forum days, whereas the same thing happened like 10 years later. And they were trying the same tactic and it was not flying at all. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the same with stores, where you'd have unscrupulous stores who would just sort of, the word of mouth wouldn't get to them because they'd be in a good position. And so they keep going. I think those guys struggle nowadays because they get absolutely review bombed everywhere they go.
Yeah. That definitely makes it harder. But also overall makes it better for people. It's funny you say that story though about the food, because I thought, oh no, he's about to talk about me. Because we did have a similar problem last year actually with the food. And I think, it's more about how you deal with the problem as opposed to kind of like you said there in terms of, you might have a problem. Ideally, you shouldn't in an ideal world, but sometimes you do. And, very quickly we came out with a message to all of our customers. We took product back and we fixed it within a matter of weeks, and we got it going again. It would have been impossible, if we'd tried to do anything other than that, because within moments it's all over Facebook or any other social media platform, and you certainly can't hide from it. So hold your hands up, own the mistake, and fix it. Yeah.
Well, I think that was the problem with this company, is they were trying to make it out that it wasn't their fault, that this was some kind of weird anomaly. Yeah. And that would fly 25, 30 years ago. It ain't flying nowadays because, everyone's got Reddit and Facebook and all the rest of this stuff. And if everyone's got the same thing and you're phoning them up and saying, my food stinks of garbage. Mm-hmm. And they're going, oh, this is the first time, and they're saying, and there's like hundreds of these things, and then you're just being lied to, and it's really poor for the brand. But you just got to do the right thing.
Yeah. Well, you don't have any other choice if you want to be here for a future, for sure. So
like what sort of what was your own thing that made you sort of get into the reptile thing? Because it is such a specialized market, and like most of the people I know who are in the reptile sort of space, they tend to be
nerds.
Geeks. They tend to be nerds. They tend to be nerds. They tend to be very, very involved.
Oh yeah. I love it. I'm definitely a self-professed nerd. I love the reptiles, and to answer your question, my dad brought home a slow worm he found on the road when I was about 13 years old, which at the time we thought was a snake, because for anybody that doesn't know, that's one of the legless, or the only legless lizard that we have here in the UK. And anyway, we thought it was a snake. My dad liked fish at the time, so he had a little, spare aquarium. We put it in there, set it all up nicely. Didn't have a clue what to do, of course. And we had it in the garage. Came down the next morning, it was gone. We didn't have a lid on this thing. It just climbed out. But nonetheless, that got me into it. All of a sudden, I wanted a pet snake. My dad let me have one. And quite honestly, the rest is history. But for me personally, I guess there's the two factors here. There's the reptile element, which I just got passionate about it. And my parents had always also been into animals. They both kept fish, parrots, dogs. So that was kind of natural. Although, my mum didn't like that when she'd come in to clean my bathroom and had a 13-foot Burmese python bathing in the bath at the time. Yeah, I had to get a shed in the garden after that moment. But but then my parents also ran businesses literally since I was born. So, they were always driving and pushing me and help me to set up my first business, which I did when I was 18, 19, I think. And sold that, did another one, and here I am today. So kind of business and reptiles are my passion, and I've managed to land myself a dream job in that regard.
But because that's the thing, is like whenever obviously, as you know, I've like sort of travelled around reptile circles for the last few years, and like it's a very impassioned but also like close community as well. Like, and it's very accepting. I very much love the reptile community because of the way they sort of bring you in. I mean, like I said to you, obviously, I spoke to Greg West on this podcast, and like when I went to Canada and I did some shows there, like they just immediately invited me in, and we were all out partying all night and that sort of stuff. And it's the same when I've been to reptile shows in the Pacific Northwest or the Southeast or wherever I've been. Like it's a really strong community of people who are generally pretty fun, to be honest, as well.
I think when you go out with reptile nerds, and I say nerds in the nicest way because I consider myself one, you know, it's the moment that you can actually talk about stuff that you really love. Because if I go out with my mates at home, you know, we'll talk about, I don't know, football or something, you know, or just whatever's going on in life. You know, I can't talk to my mates about breeding some, you know, rare snake, and you know, I mean, they wouldn't have a clue. But I love that, you know. So coming to work, I can do a bit of that. But if I was like yourself, out visiting people that love what I did, you know, that's a moment that you can really get into it and talk to people who, you know, who want to share their experiences and, you know, love to learn. So yeah, it is a great community most of the time. It depends also on which format you're in. If you're in a trade versus the consumer side, and of course they can be both. Like a big reptile show, you know, it can obviously be a mix of both. But if you're talking business, it's definitely a little bit different than the consumer shows.
That's the thing. I mean, obviously, I'm very much sort of like geared mentally towards product and business and that sort of stuff. But I do find the shows fun to go to just from the sort of the social aspect and just talking nonsense to people, to be honest. And and also, look, I mean, America's great when I do the shows there because they've got a lot of really interesting. I'm a big fan of lizards, so I particularly like Gila monsters. And there's a Jamaican guy I know who lives out in Washington State, and he's got like these super friendly Gila monsters. So I like to come see him, and I mean, there is a guy over here actually, like lives not far from me, who hasn't too.
I find it interesting that out of the many thousands of lizard species in the world, you've decided to take one of only two venomous, dangerous species. So it tells me something about you, Clayton.
I think that's fair, to be honest. But you know what it is so Peter Rice, who's up the road from me, he breeds them. Yeah. So I think that's probably
they're an awesome lizard.
They are,
yeah. And also, you know, on the basis that they are venomous, but actually yet so docile. You know, whether they can inflict pain if they so desired, but actually they're just a wonderful, friendly animal.
Generally speaking, they're just dead sweet, to be honest. I mean, out of all of them, I do love them. Probably. You just need the dangerous animals license to get one. So did you do many shows? Do you ever do IHS or anything like that?
We have in the past, but no, we don't do too many. I mean, we'll often have either myself or someone will visit just out of curiosity. But you see, predominantly Peregrine Live Foods over the years has been very much focused on being a wholesaler, not necessarily a brand owner. So as a wholesaler, you know, we had historically focused on, you know, selling other people's brands, and therefore those other people's brands would typically have their own little stall at something like an IHS show. That is changing now. You know, the market generally is changing. We are, putting a bit more emphasis into our own brands, but we are still a wholesaler, you know, through and through. That is important because customers do want choice.
No.
So our other brands are really important to us. But, you know, when you do start creating your own brands, then of course you do need to back that up with, you know, good product, good marketing, good sales tactics. And if that means being part of the shows, that is important too. So, you know, last year we went to one of the shows, and I think over the next year we'll start to do a little bit more of that. But IHS shows are really the only one, for people that don't know, you know, it's really the only one available in the UK, which is a shame, and they're not particularly big at all. So
and they change location continuously.
Yeah, there's a lot of animal rights sort of pressure facing them and whatnot. But you know, like you mentioned, you've been out to the States and Canada. I mean, the shows out there are enormous in comparison. And there's a couple out in Europe as well, Germany and Holland.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll be doing more of them in the future.
Although I do think, like, just for anyone who hasn't been to a reptile show before, and you got a choice between going to Touristica in Germany, or let's say Tidley Park or something like that in America, or the Super Show, or PAC and WRS or something like that, go to America. I'll be honest, I've been to the European shows. I'm not a massive fan, if I'm honest. I think
it depends what animals you want to go after. If you go to America, you're going to be bombarded with every colour morph, royal python or ball python, as they say in the States. And they'll be really specialist in those sort of areas. But if you go to Europe, you're probably going to see a wider variety of species that you maybe haven't seen before. You're going to probably see slightly wider variety in, say, for example, the poisoned dart frogs and day geckos and anole lizards. It's not strictly true. There'll obviously be some of that in the States as well, but I don't know. I find the European shows a little bit more sort of home from home for me. We also keep reptiles slightly more similarly to the Europeans versus the Americans.
I think do you know what it is? I think it's probably where you're a little bit more nerdy than I am on this. And for me, there's a certain entertainment value to the US shows. Yeah. So I think they make it more of a day out. More of a family day out, whereas you take Touristica in Ham, and it's kind of quite spit and sawdust.
Oh yeah, take your deodorant. Yeah.
It's kind of you walk around and you feel like you're walking into like a chicken shed or something.
Yeah,
it's a bit rough, and it's a bit the tables are very basic sort of.
Yeah,
they're like
very cramped, not a lot of space.
Yeah. Whereas you go to the big American show, there's not just like really well laid out and loads of space, but there's also other things going on. So, for example, when I was last at this Seattle show, Puyallup in the PAC and WRS one, they had like baby kangaroos and other sort of wacky crap going on in the corner, and they had like one of those balls you can ride and this sort of stuff. So, but I think, which is for, let's say, a nerd isn't necessarily needed, but I think if you're taking your family for a day out, not everybody's going to be as into it as you are, if you know what I mean. So I kind of like them from that perspective, which probably doesn't make me as much of a nerd.
Well, maybe we should do things a little bit more like the Americans at times, because we need to get the appeal there. But we face a lot more animal rights sort of pressures over here, I think, than the Americans do at the moment. Although they are getting a lot of pressure.
Well, they do have US ARC, which makes a big difference. So and they do support that quite heavily, and that lobby's quite hard. So, whereas we've got no backup here, it's an easier whipping boy in this country, I think.
Yeah, well, definitely not to the same level. I mean, we have Reptile here, and that's reformed itself recently, and I'm on the board there. We're doing some good things, but it's definitely not to the same level of what US ARC is doing, for sure. But also the market out there, it's probably about 20 times the size of the UK alone. And I would suggest the UK from a reptile industry perspective is probably second in the world after the USA. And as I said, they've got to be at least 20 times our size. So just to sort of put that into perspective, it's a different kettle of fish out there. Okay, so from a generalized pet shop sort of scenario, a lot of pet shops have quite limited reptile sort of products in them, and when you go in, they might have live food, but it would kind of be ordered to the customers who want it, and that would pretty much be it. Maybe some turtle food or something like that. Is reptile products something that a normal sort of let's say high street pet shop should stock, or is it too specialized in your opinion? I would suggest it probably depends on whether or not there's another reptile store locally. Because if there is a specialist reptile store locally and you're an independent pet store selling your typical dog, cat, and bird products and whatnot, then you're probably not going to compete very easily. Because when you're bringing in live food in particular, live food, it's in the name, it's live, but it's going to die. It'll last a few days, maybe up to a week on the shelf, but the longer it goes on for, the lower the quality is going to be. And you've got to bring in a reasonable quantity of live food, just to make the shipments worthwhile and to make some money. So if you've got a reptile store close to you then being totally honest, I would suggest it's probably not worth trying to get into the certainly live food side of things. If you haven't got one anywhere near you, and that's probably quite likely because there's probably close to 10 times the number of pet stores than there are pet stores with reptiles or reptile stores. So there's a lot of areas where there are not reptile stores covering, a good 20, 30 mile pat. And so the consumers in those areas are more than likely going to be buying their live food online. They're probably not traveling 20 miles to their, 20 or 30 miles to the nearest reptile store. They're probably getting it online on a weekly basis. So I think in those instances, if you know, which I'm sure your listeners do, their local area, then absolutely it's worth looking at it. And live food alone, let alone the rest of the reptile products, live food is a high turnover, high margin consumable. So even in, for example, I won't mention the names, but one or two large chain stores that we have in this country, the live food per square centimetre of shelf space is the highest revenue product that they have. It's obviously a lot lower revenue than, say, dog food, but per square centimetre of shelf space, it doesn't take up a lot of space and it's very fast moving. So yeah, if you've got a local customer base, it's good. If you don't have the ability to bring in the live food, let's say you have got local competition, but you want to start out with a little bit of reptile, then there are a few products that are a nice, easy add-on. For example, dried tortoise foods. There's perhaps one or two basic ranges of substrates, disinfectants, supplements. You could quite easily fill just a single 1 meter shelf, with a dozen or so products, that could still generate some interest. And once you've got those types of customers highlighting them to yourself in the store, oh yeah, I keep a reptile, that's when you can start to learn a bit more about it. And just a sort of final point in addition to that, let's just say you start off with a couple of real basic foods, a tortoise food, turtle food, a gecko food, which are all dried. They'll last on the shelf for, a year and a half if they don't sell, very quickly to begin with. We know from our data that an average reptile keeper, they don't just have one reptile. Typically, an average reptile keeper's got seven reptiles. So chances are, let's say they buy a tortoise food, they may well have a lizard, a snake, something else. So once you start to get, people coming in and you know who they are, you can build out your range slowly. And, our sales guys, for example, they can help people with that. And give them advice as to the best products to actually offer and not fill up a shop full of stuff that isn't going to sell. Yeah,
it's funny because I was looking at some survey data actually on the US market. I know obviously the US is totally different to the UK, but I think there was the surveys they were doing with reptile keepers was that on average they're spending between $100 to $200 per month on supplies for their reptile. So it's not a cheap hobby, and the people who are into it, they do spend. So, and look, if you're selling live food, you're going to sell things like substrate, you're going to sell things like, let's say, calcium, like to powder or like other supplements to powder your insects. I mean, because that's all going to be needed. Why drive them towards the end to that when it's something you can easily tackle in the store?
And there's a lot of them out there. We through our Exotics Keeper magazine brand that we have, we ran a survey a couple of years ago, and we identified that there's around 7.5 million to 8 million or so reptiles in the UK, somewhere in the region of 1 million owners. So it's not insignificant. That's third after dogs and cats. It's more so, much more so than pet birds nowadays. So I think if you're a store who generally are more likely to have, for example, some pet bird food, canaries, parrots or whatnot, if you're selling that and you deem that to be okay, then I would definitely consider a small range of reptile foods, because on average, the market size is bigger nowadays for reptiles than definitely the pet bird sector. And it's probably not far behind the small animal, sector, i.e. rabbits, guinea pigs and hamsters and that sort of thing.
I mean, pet birds taken a real kicking in the last 20 years. I mean, it was, when I was a kid, it was massive. Like canaries, budgies, that sort of stuff. But I saw the decline myself. And to be honest, I've seen the increase in reptile stuff. And I think we're a lot better positioned now. Like, technology is a lot better for reptiles than it was 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when I had a pet iguana when I lived in New York.
Exactly the animal that you shouldn't have when you only start up with reptiles, but yeah.
Nearly cooked it alive with a heat rod.
Yeah.
It used to... had a poncho and sombrero kit, which I used to have.
I know the one. Yeah, I know the one. And the heat rocks. I mean, we stopped selling heat rocks years and years ago. It's come on a long way, long way.
Yeah. I mean, that was late 90s, and I know things are totally different now. I mean, that's why, obviously, when I got more into it again, it was just seeing the difference in substrate choices and like how the people are setting up their vivariums and that sort of stuff and I think that bleeds into the industry. I think when we're doing it properly and we can actually really enjoy it. And look, I'm talking to a lot of people who are innovating in the industry still, know. So I think there's a lot more we can do.
Definitely, it's changing a lot. In fact, it kind of goes through fashion trends, I think. But at the moment, bioactive is very much the trend. I'd probably use the word trend. Maybe that's not the right word for it because it shouldn't be a trend. It's the right way, frankly, of keeping. Essentially, it's the more natural way of having a, sort of a self thriving ecosystem where the animals can live more naturally. For those out there that don't know what it means, it's basically having the right product, the right substrates, medium in the vivarium, along with, for example, isopods, which are almost like a cleanup crew. They help quite literally keep the earth kind of moving and the right sort of pH levels, get rid of the waste matter, keeps the plants thriving. So having natural plants in a tank with the right lighting to help keep everything alive, making sure you've got UV in the right format for the type of animal that you keep in, potentially misting systems depending on where those animals live and whether they're needed or not. And so that has meant that the reptile keeping sort of side of things has got a little bit almost closer to the aquarium, keeping side of things, where you can have a really beautiful enclosure where you've now got a sort of subsect of the reptile keeping hobby that's just as into plants as they are the reptiles. I've only got one terrarium at home. And I'll be honest, I hardly ever see the animals inside it. It's just a massive planted tank that just looks, nice, and is really easy, frankly, to maintain versus an aquarium. It's like having a little jungle in my home. So it's different.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them. Obviously, the increase in sales of things like isopods. Actually, so there's a lady I know in North Dakota. Who you supply PetSmart with isopods, and just saying that sales have gone massive on isopods and bioactive enclosures. So you definitely see it. But look, this comes with education. This comes with an increased ability to actually get information out there. And I think that's what we lacked in the past. And I think there's so many influencers and good like videos, but also very well educated shopkeepers who can actually help on this sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So going back to pet stores, I go into some stores and they barely keep any live food, so they might have a couple of tubs. But then, for example, I've got a friend who's got a store in Lewisham, Supreme, and he has an absolute phenomenal amount of stock, and he turns that over like every week.
Twice a week, probably.
And sells absolutely tons of it. If you were, say advising a pet store to go into live food, let's say, start really trying to broaden it out, what sort of insects would you go for? Because there's a big range.
Yeah. I mean, we have just over 100 SKUs just on live food, but that's not 100 different species of insects. That'll be different sized tubs and different quantities inside a tub or a bag. I mean, look, there's in order. You've got locusts, that are your number one bestseller by a long way. More specifically, extra large and large locusts, and that's predominantly because they're fed to bearded dragon keepers, and bearded dragons are the number one pet reptile in the UK in terms of the number of households who own them. The ball python, by the way, is probably slightly more in terms of quantity of animals, but that's because ball python keepers keep loads of them. But yeah, the bearded dragon keeper, is going to be feeding large or extra large locusts. So probably about 60% of your live food sales are going to go between one or two SKUs there. Then you've got your standard kind of brown crickets. There's different species, but essentially you're talking sort of standard and large size brown crickets. That's pretty much a staple, going to be fed to species like your leopard gecko. And after that, you sort of thin it down a little bit. You probably need to keep mealworms, waxworms, and if you're trying to be a little bit more specialist, then you start looking at dubia roaches, pachnoda grubs, silkworms, fruit flies, and also just different sizes of insects. For example, if you go back to the crickets for a minute, crickets are really popular, but a small shop isn't going to have a micro-sized cricket on the shelf, because a micro, frankly, if it's not cared for properly, it'll be dead within 2 or 3 days. So if you're not going to sell it, you basically need to know you've got customers coming in on a certain day of the week. They're going to buy them fresh, and they'll go away. And a micro cricket is going to be fed to maybe little poison dart frog keepers and things like that. So yeah, you would start out with a range of probably 6-7 different SKUs, small quantity. And once you start to understand your customers, go from there. But customers like your Supreme, they'll have sold. Do they still sell live reptiles there?
They do, yeah, they do.
Yeah, I remember going there years ago.
Yeah, they do.
When you are selling the actual reptiles, you're gonna get that first-time keeper who buys their pet bearded dragon for the first time. If they've had a good service, they're going to come back and they'll buy that live food from you pretty much every week for the next roughly 12 to 14 years, which is like the lifespan roughly of a bearded dragon. Every single week, you're going to have that coming in. So, if you get that first sale, you've got, and you do a good job, assuming your customer doesn't move house away from your local area, you've got a good lifetime value customer there.
Yeah. And what do you think about? Because obviously, I've been working with mealworms and black soldier fly larvae, and one trend I notice in America a lot is the sale of live mealworms for wild bird feeding. Mm-hmm. And that's something which I'm obviously a big advocate for, because I think dried mealworms are problematic in terms of wild bird feeding, because when they're fed, they often go to baby birds, which, although the protein's great from them, they lack moisture, which causes problems with the bird's development. So I'm a big advocate of feeding live mealworms and that sort of stuff. Are you seeing a trend for more of that sort of thing happening? Or
yes, I mean, every year, April, May time, we always see a spike in mealworm sales. Have done for years, but I do think that's got bigger in the last couple of years. Probably actually more so through COVID as well. So yes, we do see that. Now, interestingly, we don't really actively market to that sector. It just happens. So there is more, I think, that can be done. And I mean, funnily enough, actually, my next door neighbour, she runs a small independent pet shop in the middle of nowhere where I live. It's a really lovely shop. Doesn't have anything to do with reptiles. Wouldn't have the space to even get involved in it. And she does really well with live mealworms every year. And there's not many shops that do this, actually. So she'll buy mealworms from us from, I say, it's basically as soon as the weather changes, which is normally sort of April time, early April-ish. And that season goes on for, 3-4 months, roughly. And anyway, and then she stops and starts again the following year. But, for that few months, she does really well. So, yeah, you're right. Even if you're an independent pet store and you don't want to get into reptiles, just having live mealworms, which, by the way, do last a lot longer. You can keep live mealworms in a refrigerator without any food for easily a couple of weeks, and they'll be perfectly fine. Or if you don't sell very much of it at all, like my neighbour, she's not a big seller. She'll buy a tray of mealworms and she'll keep them out on the counter. Well, she'll put them in the fridge, and then if after a week or so, she'll take them out, put some leftover veg in there, some carrots or cabbage or something. They'll munch away on it, and be perfectly happy and healthy to sell. Mm. And then she'll sell it per tub, per weight, or whatever. But yeah, you can make good money, and they're super healthy, like you say.
I mean, if you go into a Wild Birds Unlimited in America, which is like a wild bird food chain store, they actually have them in refrigerators.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll literally have a refrigerated section just for mealworms because it's that big a line and it's that important a line. So I think it's something we're behind on in this country quite significantly. Yeah,
I'd very much like to see garden centres taking up on it, I have to say. Yeah, something that we have been working on a little bit. But I think that a lot of people are still, especially in a store, just afraid of a live wriggly thing, they shouldn't be. But there's a lot more that could be done there for sure.
No, I think it's definitely something that's underexploited. Underexploited for sure, to be honest. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in what your brand can do. Like in terms of, you've got the UK market well covered. I think there's still more expansion into different markets. But how do you see the future going forward? I mean, are you looking at more markets? Are you looking at increasing the markets, like let's say internationally or domestically? What's next? Because I feel like you're so well covered in this country, and I do see massive opportunities for what you do. Obviously, my knowledge in the reptile industry is more US specific than it is EU specific, but I can see a huge amount of opportunity for the company there.
So we have a number of different avenues actually that we're working on at the moment. But to answer your question as succinctly as possible, because you're right, we are pretty well covered in the UK, and the reptile market is at the moment post-COVID a little stagnant. And so for a business like ours, we do have to grow. We're looking at two aspects predominantly. There's more than that, but two main aspects of growth. So the first within the UK is new market categories. That's why we bought Fish Science, the brand, a couple of years ago, so that we'll start doing a little bit more on the aquatic side. That's quite important so that we can get our average order value up with customers. So it's not, let's say, in its first priority, a case of going after new business. A lot of our customers already that supply Reptile also sell, aquatic or general pet goods. So, we're doing quite well there at the moment, selling some fish food into a lot of different, stores that have a combination of reptile and aquatic, and obviously some dedicated aquatic stores. So we want to do more of that, whilst at the same time, some of our reptile brands, in fact, and Fish Science, our fish brand, we are, as of just last week, actually starting to take it internationally. We've never really done that before, not on purpose anyway. So we have Blue River Diets, which is our gecko food brand. That's just starting to get export now into the US, to Germany, Canada soon, Japan, and a handful of other countries, which we're really excited about. Fish Science is already in a few countries, but we're giving that a good push as well. And our other two reptile brands at the moment, ProRep and White Python. ProRep is our largest brand by quite a long way in the UK from a reptile perspective. So we're looking at starting to finally push that overseas a little bit more as well.
It's a big undertaking though, because there's a lot of markets, and
yes,
every market is massively different. I mean, they've all got, and especially I'm not sure if you're doing things like anything that requires electric, but it's like every market has a different plug and a different like voltage and that sort of stuff. So it becomes quite, it's not like you can sort of say, well, we've got a load of light things here, let's export them, because it's a completely different product.
To be honest, that's why we're actually starting with both Fish Science and Blue River Diets, because Blue River Diets is literally 7 SKUs at the minute, and each of them are virtually the same. I mean, they're different flavored foods, but from a technical standpoint, you've got to maybe have an export health certificate. Maybe you need some other sort of license to import it, depending on the country that you're in, because it's a food and it might have animal byproducts in one or two of the foods. But it's a relatively simple, easy line. And then we have Fish Science, which, all right, there's 50 something SKUs in that range. But again, it's basically all fish food. It pretty much all includes insect protein and obviously other ingredients, but it's pretty simple. Once you've kind of done the paperwork for one product, everything else is basically the same. ProRep and White Python, on the other hand, I mean, ProRep's got about 500 SKUs, White Python, I think 50, and there's electricals in there. So the level of complication ramps up significantly depending on where you want to export to. So then at that point, you've really got to be a lot more strategic in terms of which country do you want to enter and who is going to be your partner in that country, rather than kind of on a wing and a prayer thinking, I'm going to export, let's see who comes along, and I'll sell to anybody, because you may have somebody coming along in a country that might only want to place a pretty small order, and all of a sudden you've got thousands of pounds worth of work to put in to get it there.
And I think to some degree, and that maybe this is a little bit of ignorance on my part, but I think lighting products are lighting products to some degree. And I think that they're good synergy products, that if you get a successful brand, people buy into the brand and they'll buy your products as long as the quality is good. I mean, obviously there's variation in the market, but I don't think it's something that inspires people quite like food and consumables and supplements, etc. do. I mean, I have this conversation with American people all the time about the difference between UK produced supplements and US produced, that we use a lot less ingredients, we use a lot less binders and fillers, etc. And the market really wants that at the moment. And I think that really is the strength of where we're coming from in this country compared to, let's say, just bringing out a different lighting fitting or something.
Hopefully we'll see that in the coming weeks when we launch our Blue River Diets range in the US. It should be landing probably by the time this podcast is out, I'm guessing. I'm hoping anyway.
Yeah.
And our foods there are pretty much entirely natural, and the US equivalent foods are not. So we've had a huge amount of interest, from that side of the pond with our foods. So we'll see how they go. But I sense you're right. I think we'll see.
Yeah, I think we just have a different way of doing things here, and I think just talking to reptile geeks in America, which I do on a regular basis still, people are very much aware of what they're putting into their reptile. And let's say the more commercial brands are missing a trick in terms of, I think there was a way of doing things in America for years, and that doesn't equate with where the market is now. People are a lot more aware of where things are, so.
That's an interesting point, actually, because some of those big brands, a couple of those guys that we partner with, for example, ZoomEd or Exoterra, we supply both of their products, and they're great brands. When you have an all-encompassing brand, so in the reptile world, for example, if you're ZoomEd or Exoterra, or to some extent even like our own brand ProRep, if you're trying to sort of have products for everybody, although ProRep doesn't actually have that, but let's say ZoomEd or Exoterra, you've got products for everybody. They've got a great brand, they're really strong, they're great at marketing, or at least from a reptile perspective, they are.
ZoomEd are brilliant.
Yeah, and especially in the US. But how do you, when you're a brand like that, then hone in and focus on one thing? So, for example, ZoomEd actually have some, very, very, very good quality foods. Unfortunately, they're a little highly priced, so people typically don't want them. But when you've got best part of 1,000 SKUs in your range, how do you then tell the world about that food and how, because they don't, when they run their marketing campaigns, they'll do one thing one week and another thing another week, because they're trying to get around so many different products, give them all a push. And I think that's the problem. When, on the other hand, a brand comes out that's totally focused on a food, a supplement, a light, or something like that, all their effort is going to go into plugging that product over the entire year and in the future years. So there gets traction behind it. And I think that's where the big brands are. They may be market leading in the sense of their overall size and scale. But, when you look at the trends of what's been coming out over the last decade, it's typically small, brand new companies or influencers or sort of, very specialist reptile keepers that are actually starting those trends. And then the bigger brands kind of follow later on when they pick up on them.
I think that's a lot to do with how the market's transitioned, though. I think niche marketing was difficult, like up until 10 years ago, is the reality of it. And I think now the big brands, it leaves a lot more chinks in their armor. It makes it easier to attack certain things because, you take ZoomEd, for example. Like ZoomEd are great at supporting the reptile community. They'll be at the shows. They won't even be selling. They'll just be there to support the show, support the community, etc. And so they've got a good name for their brand. Like you said, there's a lot of SKUs. So when we look at their entire operation, it's very easy to actually hone in on certain angles of that and say, well, we do this, we're better at this one particular lane, and we have the ability now to niche market, whereas that wasn't the case before. And also, like I say all the time, it's distribution's easier now. You can like self-distribute, you can go to wholesalers. There's a lot more avenues for people where you don't need to, let's say, just deal with a Zoom Edge. You can deal with half a dozen companies in your position, for example. And I think you can get too many SKUs. I still stand by that.
Yeah, that's true.
You can end up with 8 different crested gecko diets, which are all the same flavor, all different products, and you don't actually help your overall business. But it's possible to do it, And I think by sort of like niching down on, let's say, having a different brand for each different. I mean, because there's some companies will do that. They'll literally have a brand name for one particular avenue of their products.
Yeah, and I think that's a good approach to take. But it does depend on what your goals are. For us, definitely that to some extent makes sense because we're a wholesaler. We like to have choice, or our customers like to have choice. And it just allows you to focus the mind on something. Like I said, the Blue River, diets, crested foods that we have. We could have easily put some crested gecko foods under our ProRep or White Python brands. But we decided to do Blue River Diets as its own brand because we believed it would have an awful lot more impact and almost, just for ourselves to ensure that we totally focus efforts on, marketing and pushing that brand. Whereas if it just slotted in as 1 or 2 products under the other 500 under ProRep, it just would have never had that same attention. And so far it's working a treat. So I think it can work really well for certain products. But on other products, it's just, perhaps just slotting another product into a bigger brand is going to make more sense sometimes.
Yeah, and also, bringing out a gecko dart under the White Python brand would be, I can imagine the confusion already.
Probably, yeah, probably.
I remember a company just having, let's say, one specific type of dog on the pack of dog treats, and it was I can't get those treats for my dog because my dog's a Frenchie, and that's a Doberman or something like that. It's like, so yeah, just that's the problem with branding is and having wide branding is actually if you brand specifically for a range, it makes it a lot more appealing to the end user, and also you get rid of, let's say, any conflicting messages. We
noticed that with some of our substrates, for example. We have the leading range of substrates here in the UK for reptiles. And years ago, Clayton, when you said you were in the industry from years ago, and when I started 25 or so years ago, you had your bark chips and Savannah Beach chips and maybe some basic sands and stuff like that. And anybody would choose what kind of substrate they wanted for their reptiles. And often it wouldn't be what we're keeping them on nowadays. Maybe 12, 15 years ago, we started with species-specific substrates under our ProRep Life Series range. So we did a Life Series tortoise substrate. That today is the number 1 best-selling substrate in the UK, easily. And our number 2 is our Beardy Life substrate. Now, the reality is you can actually go and, you can make it up yourself if you want to.
No.
I mean, you'd have to go and get, half a dozen different ingredients to do it and know the right, quantities, but nonetheless, you could make it yourself. And there were other products that were similar on the market, but just labeled as a desert substrate, for example. So marketing it as species specific for this is your bearded dragon supplement. Yeah, substrate. I said supplement, not substrate. Yeah, works great. And it just helps people, get straight to where they want to go, buy what they want.
But also in that market, it makes sense, right? I mean, if you've got a bearded dragon, isn't it easier just to get a bearded dragon substrate than try and work out exactly what you're gonna put behind it, to be honest. So
yeah, especially when you're a novice. I think when you become an expert and you're keeping a lot of different reptiles, perhaps at that point you may want to start experimenting and doing your own thing. But 70% plus of the people that are in this industry keeping pet reptiles, they're novices, they're beginners. That they might have more than one reptile, but they might have 1, 2, 3 reptiles. And then there'll be the other 30% that don't just have that average of 7, they'll have 20, 30, 40 reptiles. The average spider keeper, by the way, has 50.
I have 3. I have 3. Yeah, I have 3, and I didn't intend to have any, to be honest. I went to a invert show. And
you got suckered in.
Yeah, I got suckered in. Yeah.
Oh wait, and the next time I speak to you, we'll see how many you've got there.
Yeah, I'm running out of space for animals. That's the problem. It's like spiders were like, well, they're not going to take up that much room. So.
Do you know another interesting thought there? Actually, is so many as you were talking, and so many people think that the reptile community is male dominated, but it's not. Our survey suggests that 52 or 53% of reptile keepers here in the UK are actually female, especially the youngsters coming in. There's a lot of young women that are entering the hobby. And you see that more at shows as well when you're walking around them now too.
I was going to say that. I can believe that because obviously being at shows, I know as many women as I know men from the shows. I mean, again, and I think there's probably like a stereotype of a dude who's a bit like me with tattoos and a beard and all this sort of stuff and a bit wacky, But actually, like just from being on the ground, I know a huge amount of women who are involved in it, to be honest. So I can totally believe that. It is a very, very balanced mix, to be honest. And just from a distributional point of view, like obviously, what sort of MOQs do you run out to stores? Just if you were a store, let's say, and you were just like, okay, I want to test just having.
Well, we don't have an MOQ. You could order 1 tub of insects if you want for a little over £1 or something, but you're just going to pay shipping on that. So if you're asking, what's an MOQ in order to get free shipping, that is a little different because we, depending on what types of products you're buying, we have the live reptiles, we have the frozen goods, we have live plants, really heavy vivariums and tanks versus lightweight light bulbs and things like that. So it kind of depends. But in short, you're talking £500 order to get free shipping. Yeah. Which might often mean a pallet or a dedicated van sent to you. You can place an order any day of the week. Sorry, that's not true. 6 days of the week. We operate 6 days, Sunday through to Friday. And we'll deliver next day, any one of those days, and you could order whatever you like.
Oh, right. Because obviously, a key part of pet shops is making sure that they can economically sell a product. Because one thing I'd always come across, like talking to stores, is there's a fear that if they buy a product range, let's say, can they make up another order? Because what you don't want to be doing is having the bar set so high that you actually you place an order for live food and you then can't. I mean, look, if you got to pay a bit of shipping, you got to pay a bit of shipping because what do you get in like a postage pack? 4 cartons, is it? I mean,
we have so our largest box that we ship out for live food in is 80 tubs worth. So we'll send that via a courier as opposed to Royal Mail. And we do send single tubs out, for example, we do work with internet companies and things as well to drop ship some bits on their behalf. But predominant live food business is via stores. And, we'll ship a box of 80 tubs out for, less than £10, to guarantee get there next day. And if you're selling 80 tubs of live food, you're going to be making, it does depend on the margin that you want, but, over £100 profit on that, easily. So, you can deal with the shipping if appropriate. And then you have the balance, by the way, of how often you want a delivery, because pretty much all the good reptile stores will have 2 deliveries per week. That's because live food is best as fresh as possible. So they'll typically place an order on a Sunday or a Monday to get there next day. Same again on a Thursday, so they'll get their delivery in on a Friday, and they'll have as much fresh live food as possible. And the smaller stores will probably instead work with a once a week delivery and educate their customers to come and get their live food on the day that it arrives, rather than wait to 6 days' time, and it's not as good quality.
What's left on there is all like hanging off. And
that's a mindset change as well for a pet store that's looking at live food, because at the end of the day, or the end of the week, or half a week if you're getting 2 weekly deliveries, is you want your shelf to be empty, or at least close to it. Which is, as I say, a mindset change, because typically you don't want to walk around a shop and see an empty shelf. But when it comes to live insects, you don't want a full shelf of live food other than the moment that it's put on that shelf. So twice a week delivery is best if you want optimum quality, unless you're educating your customers to come in on the day when it arrives.
And then if you're ordering all the substrates and that sort of bits, that would all then obviously you try and aim to get it up to a £500 minimum order, or you'd still deliver with the post
with anything, yeah. And actually, I want to say £500 minimum order. It also does depend what courier. So there is another service that will offer it. It's a £350 minimum order.
Okay,
that sounds a bit complicated, and to be honest, it's probably more complicated than I would like. But the cost of shipping is the biggest cost of our business. It's very significant, and that's typically because in the reptile industry, and more specifically because of live food, people have to order so frequently that actually that's almost what drives the average order value to be a little bit lower. Whereas if you're in the pet industry and you're buying dog food or cat food, or let's say even fish foods and things, often people are getting just a once a week or even once every 2 or 3 week delivery from their supplier. But with reptiles, you need it minimum once a week, preferably twice a week. So yeah, you're typically placing lower orders values.
Yeah, which makes a big difference. When you're actually selling to stores, because it is a mindset change from, let's say, if a store is looking to do live food, like then saying, well, I deal with, let's say, Carney Love, and I order off them once every 3 weeks. It's planning for a once or twice a week delivery is a big mindset shift for them.
Yeah.
Awesome. So how can everyone get hold of you if they want to, if they're not already dealing with Peregrine Live Foods?
Sure. I mean, the best thing is just go to our website. You can go to peregrine.co.uk. And that's it. We also have various social media channels. I'm terrible at it, with different brands as well, but probably too many to go through, and I'll probably muck it up. But if you're a shop, definitely go onto our website. You can get a sales rep to come out and see you. You can also contact us, via there. And we also have, if you're a shop possibly that even deals with us already, which if you're doing reptiles, I suspect you probably are. If you don't know, we have a trade-only Facebook community page as well. You have to essentially be a member of that. So if you're a store, search for Peregrine Live Foods on Facebook groups, and you'll find a trade-only community as well there. That's a pretty good community where you can see what we're doing and chat to other people if you like. But it's really handy. It's actually probably one of the most important ways actually now that we market to our shops.
It's actually, do you know what? Like, it's actually a really good way for you to actually see what's actually really happening with your customers. I think there's always a danger, because obviously we've got 170 employees. Yeah. Very easy to become quite divorced from the customer if you're not careful. So actually having a community where people can just
moan at us.
Just get on there and grief you up, and just. But do you know what? People like that. Like that.
Yeah, and to be honest, I always wanted it, right from the beginning, and I wasn't afraid of them moaning at us. Sometimes it was just good for me to see it for myself as well, and we'll always fix a problem. So yeah, it is useful, but when you're trying to market to the trade and you want to advertise prices, for example, or deals that you clearly can't, you don't want to be visible to the consumer, you can still do that on social media, but in a closed group. That's really useful because you got shopkeepers sitting behind the counter when it's a quiet moment in a store, jumping on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and they'll, if they're a member of that group, they'll see something pop up in their news feed straight away. Whereas if you don't have that, then you're basically limited to sales rep visits, print style media, or emails, or going to a show or something like that. And that's not what shop owners are normally accessing every day. They're going to be on some form of social media channel too, right? So a closed group is, I would suggest to any business out there selling to other businesses, a pretty good way of accessing customers daily.
Yeah, no, I love that. Honestly, I think it's brilliant. Really, cool. Really good, man.
Cool.
No, thanks for coming, dude.
Thank you very much, Clayton. Good to meet you properly.
Yeah.
First time.
Yeah, man. Yeah. No, thanks a million.